All right, everybody. We welcome back to Caravan to Midnight from the better part of a year ago. Is that even possible? Yes. The one and only Gill Broussard. He's a science-based researcher, if you're new to Gill and his work. Amateur astronomer and theologian who found new evidence based on historical Chinese records of planetary bodies that provide data points he's plugged into NASA-type astronomy software that utilizes Kepler's law of planetary motion. It's all about, well, Planet X. The equations show the data is from a real object, approximately 6.5 to 7.5 times the size of Earth. It's on an elliptical orbit, averaging a yearly cycle closer to 360 than the typical stated 3,600 years of Planet X. He has some new data. The last time he was on the program was extremely compelling. I think I can say with some certainty, Gill Broussard never disappoints. So here we go. Hi, Gill. Good to see you again.
Hello, John. Thank you. Thank you for having me again today.
What's new? What has transpired since last we spoke? I know you're on the job all the time, and you don't strike me as the kind of guy that takes very many days off. I could be wrong, but I'm just thinking,
Correct. I'm kind of a workaholic in a way. Whenever I'm doing research or pretty much anything, I kind of give it my all. We have quite a bit of new data to share with your audience today. Archeological finds that ends up proving out areas of the data that we talked about the last time. And we can go over, I just want to tell the audience who knows about my work that many astronomers that we were working together looking for this object, seeing if it may line up with a date that we were concerned about March 25th, 26th. There is no sighting of it. The only thing that's claimed out there on the internet is lens flares and sundogs that are not a planet. Whenever a planet actually will show up, there's 2 to 3 million amateur astronomers that can put a telescope on and give you great detailed surface images of it if it would, whenever it does come around for us to see it. Sigh of Mr. Relief that nothing will happen this March or April as far as this planet involved.
Yeah.
We may see war and economic collapse coming up this next year. It seems like it's pretty imminent, and that is two of the major hallmarks that the Bible says we have to see before the planet comes. CO3 is economic collapse. CO4 is war, famine, and pestilences, plural. CO5 is a peace agreement before the first meteor shower. It seemed like those seem to be imminent, especially for this next year. So we will keep looking. I believe you'll get a shout out when it does appear.
Mm-hmm. No, when you're talking about this next year, you're talking about this one. You're talking about 2016.
Right. From on a Hebrew year, it's either it's from Passover to Passover. Mm-hmm. Really, it's a like March April scenario to the next March April, which the month of Passover happens to be the exit area of this planet, as far as throughout history has shown us. And so we have a pretty good layout of its orbital path because of the great help that the Chinese and the Japanese and the Korean astronomers gave us, that we're able to plot a segment of its course, and that gave us the rest of the orbit, which is closer to 360. It does have a erratic orbit. It is not a stable orbit because it depends on what it's bumping into, because it's on many, well, at least Earth's planetary planes, where that also happens to line up with some of the past planets and debris fields. And that affects its orbit, whether it passes close to other planets or whichever. That causes a change in the time frame of its orbit.
Gill, what holds this thing in its orbit?
There's if you want to call it, for lack of a better word, like a magnetic trough. Same thing that holds Earth in its orbital trough. We can see evidence of that. Remember, it's not gravity that rules the universe. That was a assumption that the astronomers had, or theory, which was never really proved out. And the physicists came out with their own theory that the universe was electromagnetic in nature, which is many magnitudes stronger than gravity. And just recently, I can even play you a minute long video that proves out this theory. When Comet Siding Springs flew by Mars, it made a electrical discharge against the planet when the tail crossed over to the planet, because the tail of a comet is not ice particles. The physicists said that would be plasma, and it proved out. You had lightning or a huge jolt to the planet Mars that you could see. We have evidence on Earth of one of these plasma strikes. It's called the Eye of the Sahara. It's 30 miles across. Now, just think of a lightning bolt that's 30 miles across.
Wow. Whoa.
Scientists have proved that this is not a meteor crater because it's not concave. Matter of fact, you have a slide in your the file that I sent you. The scientists proved that this circular formation with multiple rings, eccentric rings coming in towards the center, was not a meteor crater because it doesn't have the material associated with a meteor crater, and it's flat. It's not concave. It actually dissolved part of that mountain away. About I think it's around I think it's over 100 feet, maybe 300 feet of the mountain was dissolved by this plasma strike. You can hear stories of such a thing, the Greek mythology, where they talk about Zeus throwing lightning bolts that dissolve mountains. Well, we have an actual case here that it happened, which is actually this planet that's been called Zeus and Jupiter, Baal, multiple ancient pagan gods. This was this planet that passed by. It's called the Destroyer. It's a real object. The data points to a very real object, thanks to the Asian astronomers.
All right, I know this has been discussed before, but is there anything in the historical record that you've been able to determine where this thing did cause problems before, perhaps, back in the BC days? Well, I mean, we're only to 2016 now, but you say it's a 360-year course rather than a 3600. Has this thing wreaked a bit of havoc at some time?
Oh, yes. There's 14 documented events in the biblical records, another 5 or 6 secular records that we can find. Events we can go through just quickly. I mean, there was Noah's flood. That actually happened. The impact from a meteor made the Gulf of Mexico, which in turn misejected on the opposite side of Earth about 71% of our crust, which happens to be the exact volume of our moon. And then the water receded into the void that was left, which is our oceans today. That's the reason why you had Pangea. It was landlocked at the time.
Oh.
And that's the only way you can have that, because if the Earth was molten and spinning, wouldn't the continental crust be even across the surface? It wouldn't pile up only on one side and cause a wobble. That goes against physics.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, you have the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which now we have archaeologists have found the actual site of Sodom and Gomorrah. Dr. Steve Collins from the Trinity University in New Mexico, he's doing digs in Jordan at Tel El Haman, where he's found evidence that was the actual literal Sodom and Gomorrah. What's interesting about his findings is that the southwest corner of the town, which is a very large town he found, it takes up 50 acres or so. The buildings were blown off of their foundations like an explosion had happened. He found people in tortured positions as they died. Some people were slammed against the wall where their bones are shattered.
Wow.
And there's a layer of ash associated there. He did the testing of this ash, and it comes to find out that it's either a comet or a meteor that exploded over that region that destroyed the town. That's his findings.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what we were saying a year ago without his findings. keep in mind. And this proves out that Lot's wife was vaporized in a way, just like we said, in that her shadow was left, and ancient man described it as, look, God had turned it to a pillar of salt. But that's not God speaking. That's the description of man trying to say, put words to what they see. That happened at the same time as the Tower of Babel, which we also have a new archaeological find on that also. There's this tablet that they found with basically three suns on the top of it. They three brightly same-size objects. Two of them were identified, one as the sun and one as the moon, but what's the third one? For it to have the same reference in size, you're looking at another planet of some type, which we date that this is the same time as Sodom and Gomorrah, as that this planet was passing by that caused the destruction, which the ancient Jewish writings state that the top of the tower was burned by fire. Well, how do you burn fired brick? It was a meteor shower that destroyed the top of it, and then it says the base sank, which is liquefaction because of the earthquake, and just the center of it, the middle of it, is here still showing today, and you can see it south of the ancient city of Babel, and so that shows us clear archaeological evidence as they were trying to document this throughout. Then after that, it was Joseph of Egypt, which we talked about on the last show about the Niebuhr disc. It's the oldest artifact found in Europe that shows a arrangement of stars and planets. And when we go back and date that correctly, it brings us to the exact date and year that the mid of the 7-year drought of Joseph of Egypt. And it shows that the sun is in an eclipse mode, but the moon is in a crescent shape. That points out to you that the moon is not involved with this eclipse of the sun, because you can't see the stars unless the sun is blotted out. And so it's actually clearly showing us a third object is involved that they weren't aware of at the time.
Amazing.
Yes.
That's amazing. I'm just listening. You just keep going. This is like a fireside chat, only better.
Yeah. Now, recently they found ancient cities, 120 meters, that's like 395 feet, below the Gulf of Mexico on the western side of Cuba. And scientists or archaeologists are confused. How could a civilization be so deep underneath the water, because they have no records that the ocean or the Gulf was that low? And what civilization is it? They're not sure of. Well, if you go back and piece together what we stated in the last program, which I have some slides there, showing where Cuba used to be attached to the northern part of South America, then you can see that these cultures is part of the South American, or the Aztecs or Mayans, or one of these ancient cultures that used to be at the top of South America, because the western part of Cuba was attached to South America, according to our data here on what we were drawing in the past there. So
yeah,
they're going to come to a conclusion that they have a hard time piecing together, because they're not looking at the Gulf of Mexico as a meteor impact. One of the other interesting things is, remember that I was talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, that professor, Stephen Collins, he found the entrance to Sodom and Gomorrah, where those two angels had walked through, and where Lot had met the two angels. One of the other interesting things he found was, this is the first time in archaeology they found two male homosexuals that died together in a bed. Either they were in the middle of an act that misidentifies them as that, but they were able to find the skeletons in this same dig that they were doing, confirming again what the Bible was indicating. And
so let me ask you this. How much wiggle room is there? You've already said that it looks like some pretty catastrophic events of one kind or another, whether it's social or epidemiological or financial, might occur over the course of this Passover to Passover year. But what kind of tolerance, what kind of wiggle room do we have in there for fixing a date? Could be a year off, could be 2 years off, could be 5, I guess.
Scientifically, well, I'll give you 2 areas. If it's scientifically we're talking about, if a person can predict a comet or a meteor to come back without even seeing it yet, within 10 to 20 year range, that would be hitting the bullseye in scientific terms. And I give a date from 2013 to slightly past all the way up to 2030 as being a scientific window of where it might return, the most likely time frame, if it kept a semi-normal orbit, okay, because it depends on what it runs into, because there's a lot of debris when it's on a planetary plane.
Mm-hmm.
Now, biblically, the biblical narrative narrows this considerably. It says, all is fulfilled before the generation that saw Israel formed. All of this will be completed. Well, when it was declared to be made a nation, which was 1947, and if you're at the age of 12, which is the age of accountability, being a witness in the biblical, you're 83 for this year, you'll be 84 this next year. It can't be the next Jubilee, which is a 50-year period. That generation would have died. And this generation is getting to the point where they're just about extinct. If it goes another 10 or 15 years, they'll be gone. But it goes on to clarify even more. Now, we take the story of Jacob. He says, this is going to be the trouble of Jacob. Well, we go look at it. Jacob worked for 7 years. Then he was tricked by a bride he didn't know nothing about. Then he had to work another 7. But if you throw in the Jubilees year, as well as the Sabbath years and stuff, there may be a law that we might have missed. There's a law that says that you're not supposed to have sex, basically, on a Sabbath day. It doesn't say Sabbath day, it says Sabbath. Well, we tend to refer that to only the Sabbath day now in modern days. But suppose that meant also the Sabbath years. Well, both Sabbath year and a Jubilee are considered a Sabbath. Therefore, a marriage can't be consummated on those years. You have to wait to the beginning of the next year. We have one more year. If this is the Jubilee, which I can't 100% confirm, but it seemed like the rabbis are convinced, and many other people, that we may have one more year. In other words, I don't think we have a 10-year window as a wiggle room, biblically.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that the Bible says we have to see economic collapse, seal 3, and we've already seen seal 1 and 2. Seal 3 will be economic collapse, and we're looking at seal 4, war, famine, and pestilences. Somewhere in there, Damascus is going to be a ruinous heap where nobody will live there. They're still living there in sections, but eventually it'll get to where no one will live there. You're going to see a food shortage because of the economic collapse, as well as transportation being shut down. There's already inklings right now. If you look at the software that shows you the trafficking of cargo vessels and tankers,
yeah,
there's hardly any movement across the oceans. Hardly any at all.
That's what I've been hearing now for weeks and weeks.
Oh, that's a fact. If you look at the software that tracks this, they estimate that they have to put up in storage at least 30% of cargo containers and tankers. There's an overproduction of these tankers versus the volume that the market needs. So you're looking at quite a few businesses going out of business, basically. in the vessels industry that's transporting goods and oil. You're also looking at negative interest rate, which is, you can call this a soft bail-in, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
When they start charging you to keep your money there, that would probably lead to a bail-in, which would then be an economic seizure, rationing of money, basically what it is. And then during the next seal, you're looking at rationing of fuel and rationing of food. And that's why the biblical rehearsal patterns tell you to, during the Sabbath and the Jubilee, is to store up food. These are rehearsal patterns. These not a feast. These are he's giving you instructions to follow. It says on the Sabbath and Jubilee, store up food. And money. He says, get out of debt if it's possible. I would say that this economic crash that's coming is going to fall within either the Sabbath year or Jubilee. Now, we're just about finished with the Sabbath, so it doesn't look like it's going to be finished. But there's Jubilees coming up, and again, I will just stress out that I can't tell the future. I can only stress that it greatly concerns me because of what we're seeing in the news and what the Bible literally says. We're seeing a match that's coming up here. Possible World War III with tactical nukes coming up. Both sides have said it, that they're willing to use tactical nukes. That's never happened before.
Mm-hmm.
And you will see millions of people die. Some people you need to read the text quite carefully. It says a quarter of the world population will be under the threat of death, which is basically global terrorism that will spur. We will have some people dying, which will be in the millions, but we won't see 1.8 billion people die. You'll only see 1.8 people under threat of death, which is terrorism. And that's when Israel will become like a heavy millstone around the necks of the country. This little small nation, which is about maybe a third of my state, okay, in size, is that heavily weighed on all the other nations, on their economy, everything, because of terrorism. Who would have ever expected that, literally?
Yeah.
But here it is in the news,
yeah.
And it's about to happen. I think people made a grave mistake not taking biblical narratives more serious and more factual, especially these stories. It points to a real planet that has come through here. The Almighty uses, whether he's blessing you or judging you with it. It can be either. But he says in this next one, this is going to be a punishment. He says this next time it comes around is the most terrible event of the entire Earth's history. That includes Noah's flood. Noah's flood was not the worst. This coming event is.
And here we are, living in it, living in that time. Yeah, yes. I keep thinking about it. That's interesting that you should say that. I was thinking that earlier. It's sort of like a hawk will come down and just kind of buzz a flock of pigeons, almost like, "Hey, you morons, are you paying attention?" And they'll all say, this thing just comes swooping through like, "Hey." And in the case of the human being, it's this planet that does it. So I take it, Gill, what we're saying here is that if we haven't heeded the signs up to this point, the next one's going to hurt.
Extremely. It's going to be a record breaker. It's going to be the most extreme event that Earth goes through because of our modern technology is our Achilles heel. I can explain some of the things we might see under a plasma universe model, not a gravity ruled model.
Well, please do, but give us a sense of the difference between those two.
Sure. Well, in the biblical records, it indicates that this object has probably passed between the moon and Earth in the past during Joshua's long day, because him and his men, there's discrepancies in the ancient text. Some say it's 10 times larger than the moon, and some have said that's 50 times larger than the moon. I have yet to find the ancient documents where it claims it, but it came from reputable scholars, so that's why I'm saying this. And one was Mr. Emanuel Veliskowski, another one was Chuck Messler and such, and I greatly respect those gentlemen for their research. If this was a gravity-ruled model, as they claim, with such large reach of gravity, then it should have grabbed onto Earth or the moon and taken us into deeper space, and this would have been the end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't. And matter of fact, we know in Hezekiah's time it came close enough where it tilted the Earth 26 to 28 degrees. Same thing with Joseph of Egypt. Earth tilted 26 to 20. I can document 3 to 4 cases that Earth is tilted 26 to 28 degrees in tilt. It does not flip over in. It tilts. And it comes back very close to its original position, up to anywhere between 4 to 7 degrees. And that can only happen with a plasma universe ruled model, because the limit of gravity for a planet would be considered the Roche limit, which is roughly 1.5 times radius, would be the limit of its reach for its gravity. The rest of that is electromagnetic. So Earth is tilting because of just like two opposite poles on a magnet are attracting. Well, that's what causes the tilt. The two magnets are tilting towards each other. And that causes a 26, 28 degree tilt. Another thing that proves this out is, like what I was saying, that model that took place. If you have time, I can show you that video. That I can share the screen.
That'd be great. Let's do it.
All right. Let's.
Astronomy and physicist. Mm-hmm. The physicists made a prediction just recently that when Comet Siding Springs passed near Mars, that if their theory that the comet tail was plasma, there'd be electrical discharge between the comet and Mars. And that's what we observed. Observation like that is science-based.
I looked into Comet Siding Springs passing by Mars that would confirm this theory. NASA was providing a live feed during its arrival back in October 2014 of this encounter between the two bodies. When it got a little too close, NASA cut the feed to this much further out angle. As you can see, this image is not all that great. Fortunately, I was able to find another angle from a different available video, given by another researcher and amateur astronomer, Dr. Fritz Hemrich, a professor of medical sociology. He was located near on Mount Tide National Park, Tenerife, Spain. He was able to record this interaction between Siding Springs and Mars. What you're seeing is Mars light up like the sun after Comet Siding Springs' tail passes by, almost like that of an electromagnetic pulse. There was no major news media that covered this interaction. The only and closest article that I could find was given out by CNN titled, "Comet Siding Spring Buzzes Mars, but NASA orbiters and rovers are safe." Nothing else was talked about.
Because our present models, using the physicist's model of electric universe and the plasma tail, proves out scientifically the events in many of the stories of the Bible. Only a plasma model works. The gravity model does not work. So if we would have tried to do these equations 15 years ago, we would.
All right, John, were you able to hear? Were you able to hear that?
Yeah, that's extremely interesting. Ooh.
And
NASA's always cutting the feed, aren't they?
Yes, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, all the time. Well, that's the whole thing. Something interesting shows up within view of the lens, and let's cut the feed. That's too interesting. The people. I mean, what do you figure the deal is there? Seriously, is the easy one is they're afraid that it will panic the citizens of Earth. I don't think it will panic the citizens of Earth personally. So I mean, why cover this up?
Well, it probably won't panic you and I because we're more or less level-headed on thinking, and we can think ahead. But that's not exactly the average public. If you ever been into a bad situation, some of them do panic. You've seen riots and looters.
Oh yeah.
But it doesn't happen across the board. But it does happen to a small group.
I suppose that's true. Yeah.
I guess it really depends on your education level of this type of event.
Well, outside of prayer, I'm thinking there's not much preparation to be done for such an event because we don't really know how bad it's going to be or what all it's going to affect. I mean, don't you find?
Actually, if you understand the physics a little bit, you can understand it. And when you read the biblical accounts, the scriptural accounts, it lines up with the physics. In other words, like when Earth starts to enter the plasma tail, of course we'll have an eclipse. Then the sun is blocked because the tail points opposite of the sun. When that plasma hits the magnetic field of the Earth, you're going to see the aurora of the north and south go all the way to the equator, and it'll be very bold colors. It's going to be very thick, and it's going to sound like a trumpet. When the aurora is super active, it actually sounds like a trumpet, which is kind of interesting that the Bible even talks about that. This affects our rotation. It slows us down by 12 hours, exactly what took place in Joshua's long day. Earth will experience again a slowing down of 12 hours. Now the target zone, the astronomers will predict that they're going to use a gravity model, and they're going to predict that the Earth will be impacted by meteors on Europe, Africa, and Asia, and into the Middle East area. But the biblical gives you a clear description. It says 1/3 of grass, trees, and then later it says rivers, 1/3. Well, they just describe continental crust. Well, what half of the Earth is 1/3 of continental crust? That's North and South America. So after a 12-hour delay, the target zone changes, which this happens to be the false miracle of the Antichrist. This is the miracle that, because all the scientists of the world will predict the Middle East being hit, and especially the Muslims are going to be trapped in their country because nobody will give them a visa because of the terrorist activities that took place in Seal 4. So they're trapped within the borders of their own country trying to escape. Then here comes this Mahdi, or false anti-Messiah, will make this false miracle and say that he will slow down the earth by 12 hours and have fire fall on their enemy. And it matches our scripture for the Antichrist. When Earth tilts, you need to be near the pivot point. I think I have that in the pictures that I provided for you. Knowing where the pivot point is one of the ways to survive this. Because if you're 90 degrees from the pivot point of the tilt, if you're on open water, you could have as high as 300-mile-an-hour winds. If you have some terrain blocking, it'd probably be around 150-mile-an-hour winds. Well, if you ever been in a hurricane at 150-mile-an-hour winds, trees don't stay in the ground.
No, your face doesn't really stay on your skull.
Exactly. So if you're in an F5 tornado, that develops 300-mile-an-hour winds, and grass doesn't even stay in the ground.
Yeah.
When Earth, it takes 6 hours to have the tilt happen, and you're looking at about 1,800 miles of movement, and that roughly calculates to about 300-mile-an-hour winds, but you have the ground terrain that kind of gives you a little drag. So on land, you're looking at about 150, but on open water, you're looking at some serious waves and winds. So to be at the pivot point of the tilt is helps to survive this. And that'll be around the Middle East, Southern Europe region, where the winds will be a lot calmer. And this is during the time that the Messiah, the first taking away, happens. And he picks up this small group of people, it says a remnant, and he brings them to a place of safety, where they're in that place of safety for 3.5 years. Then at the end of 3 is a second taking away, where you can be anywhere on earth, and you're brought to heaven. One of the interesting things Scripture talks about is that the 4 winds, remember the angels are sent out and stops the 4 winds?
Yeah.
Well, you can't stop the wind unless you stop the rotation, because the rotation is what causes the wind.
Oh, yeah.
It talks about a night which is twice as long, which That's what will cause the Jerusalem side will have 12 additional hours of nighttime. The U.S. side or American side will have 12 extra hours of daylight. And the meteor shower in March is on the daylight side of Earth. 5 months later, the meteor shower is on the nighttime side of Earth, which would be, again, North and South America, but a little bit more towards the Pacific side, according to the data. And that's when a large meteor, the size of a mountain, hits Earth, which is Wormwood. It's giving a description of a meteor the size of a mountain that hits Earth. It says Earth is hit, and it's wobbling so violently, it's like a hut in the wind. That's a viewpoint from space. How did they get that? You know?
A meteor the size of a mountain.
Right.
Yeah, that'll put your planet through some serious changes. I say this flippantly, but it's like this is not. It'll be exciting. I take it that at that point your 401k becomes moot, doesn't it?
Yep. Wow. So if you look at the data carefully, you can actually see where scientifically they're mentioning the things in the proper order. How can they do that if they didn't have any knowledge of the science yet? They had it correct. It's a plasma model, and they're basically stating it. We have some advanced knowledge given to us as whether or not we choose to use it or not is there.
Yeah.
And that's why he gives us a rehearsal pattern that requires you to be in Jerusalem for the Passover feast. This is going to happen during the Passover holidays, that you're required to be in Jerusalem, observing the Almighty's. These are not feasts of the Jews. He says, these are my feasts. These are his, and you will keep them forever, he says. These rehearsal patterns will be forever. And you're supposed to physically show up in Jerusalem on the time of Passover. So he's already given us the way, where to go, and he's given us the data as whether or not we choose to recognize it or not. It's a choice.
That's pretty amazing. All right, so I don't mean to be a moron, but I'm thinking that's in Passover is going to be what, April?
It runs somewhere between March and April.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be dictated when the barley is ripe. Then you know that Passover falls on the 15th, mid of the month on a full moon. It's not something you can calculate ahead of time. Right now in the Netherlands, they have their season is 6 weeks early. The trees are blooming.
Mm-hmm.
That's 6 weeks ahead of time. This planet changes the seasons a little bit. So we have to be observant. We just can't use astronomy and say, okay, this is the equinox, and the odds are it's going to be that. No, you have to be observant. You have to look for the grain and see if it's ripe, because you can't use old grain to make the matzah for the Passover. It requires you to use new grain. He's very detailed on what he says to do, and it's whether or not you choose to follow it or not is a problem with some.
Let me ask you this: if it's that was the moron factor there that I was referring to a little while ago, folks. I wax self-deprecating, every once in a while, just to maintain a little humility. But it's like, well, so when do we find out when it is Passover? That is March or April. I'm seeing like April 22nd, maybe.
Well, it's near the equinox, and it says the grain has to be aviv. That's an agricultural term. That means whenever you go in the field.
So you're saying it's not fixed. It's not a fixed date. You got to watch for when it's time. Basically, what's happening? What's happening on Earth is like when the crows are flying low and the grain's ripe in the field, so it's time for Passover. I mean, I'm not trying to be flippant here. I'm just trying to get a sense on how to figure out when this event may actually occur. That's what I'm trying to do.
Revelation is clear. It tells you what to look for. First, you have to look for economic collapse. And he already told you to get out of debt during the Sabbath year and a Jubilee year. Then he says there will be war, famine, and pestilences. Okay? Then there's going to be a peace agreement. Then it's going to be around Passover, because all of the data we have, this is where it exits. Exits around the month of Passover, which falls in between March and April. Yeah. It's usually by the equinox. You look for a first sliver of light on the moon, and you check the grain. The grain should be the consistency of dough. Whenever you parch it over fire, if it's too much liquid, it will vaporize into powder. If it's the consistency of dough type, it will harden into a grain. Therefore, you'll have ripe grain 15 days later for Passover. And that's how you know the beginning of a year, is when you see the first sliver of the moon, and the grain is Aviv, they call that.
Yeah. And
you have to it's a physical act. You have to observe it. It's called the watchers, the watchmen on the wall. Mm-hmm. You have to look for signs of economic collapse and war. You also have to look for the grain, because the seasons are going to change. And then you're going to have a 40-day warning, like the governments are going to tell the world that there's a threat. They're already leaking information that it's possible that there's a planet. Yeah. They used to, look at the amount of meteors coming in. We've never seen this before, the amount of streaming meteors coming in, whether it's crossing our atmosphere or whether it's hitting the Earth.
I don't mean to keep cutting you off. You got me excited here. But look, when is Passover in 2016? Okay, the holiday of Pesach, or Passover, is an annual, okay, we know what it is. 15th day of the Jewish calendar of Nisan, which derives its name for the passing over the homes of the Israelite slaves during the 10th plague. Begins in the evening at sundown prior to the first day of the festival. And it appears, Friday, April 22nd is what they're saying here in this almanac thing.
When the second temple got destroyed, the high priest called Hilia changed it from a lunar calendar to a mathematical calendar, which he adopted from the Arabs. They were using a mathematical equation to figure out when the year starts. They are not allowed to switch back to a lunar, even though they're in the land. They're not allowed to disavow a high priest command unless another high priest says so. And they can't have another high priest unless they build the temple. So by the time they build the temple, they're too late for this event. They were never supposed to change the calendar. So it's a lunar calendar, and you go by what the biblical records tell you on how to predict the year, the beginning of the year. It's fluid. It's not fixed. You have to be observant. It's the same thing with this planet. Under normal conditions, we should have seen it 16 years ahead of time before it ever reaches us.
Yeah.
Because when it reaches Neptune's orbit, it's roughly twice the size of Neptune. And the model shows that it takes 16 years to reach us on a normal model. Where Pioneer and Voyager probes they saw 24 years before it reaches. So 16 years roughly gives you 2016 or 17, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the level of earthquake rising, bird kills, tsunamis, volcanoes, droughts, floods, bird and fish deaths, sinkholes, this extreme seasonal change, and the amount of meteors coming in, that's not normal for all of these to be in the extreme range all at the same time. The odds of that are impossible. This is clear indication approaching body is nearing. And as it nears, these things get more extreme. The last 100 to 150 days is going to be quite a ride, you see, on Earth.
All right, well, Gill, let me ask you this. If you were to be inclined to give people an idea what they should do to prepare for what will possibly be, for some, well, not possibly, it will be for some, the most terrifying event they could possibly imagine. For others, they won't worry about it.
Correct.
What would you tell them? What would you tell the ones who are destined to be terrified, and maybe they can alter their destiny just a little bit and not be terrified and meet this event, which most certainly has happened in the past, which most certainly will be happening again. So it's inevitable. What do you tell the fearful?
Basically, the biblical accounts are scientifically and morally correct. It says for you to store up 1 year of food, get out of debt if it's possible, and when it comes time, when you see the peace agreement, there'll be a recognized period of peace before the signing. Travel to Jerusalem during that time period, because flights will be able to be flying then, because there'll be an semblance of peace. Be in Jerusalem during that time, and you'll see the Antichrist. Whoever gets the glory for the signing of this peace agreement will be the Antichrist. And
one more time, the peace agreement will be between
around January of whatever year that it's somewhere, either January or February, depending if it's a event in April or March. You have to have it's X amount of, the Bible gives us numbers, but unless we can cite this thing, then I can give you an actual date of its arrival. And probably the internet will be down for the war. You won't get a pre-warning. Each person is on their own. They have to understand this and know what they're seeing in, as far as this war, famine, and what's in the sky and what to do.
All right, and this peace agreement will be to keep things calm between which nations?
For global terrorism to stop and whatever little nuclear confrontations in the Middle East to stop. Israel will be forced to give up the West Bank. They'll be forced to. And in one of the old prophets, it says, when Israel changes its border, its hand of protection is removed from them. That opens the door for them to be attacked 3.5 years later and lose. That's the last battle before the Messiah comes back and saves them. But Israel will win this next war against it. It will be rough for most of the countries because of global terrorism. The only way the countries will have peace is if they go along with pushing Israel into forcing them to give up the land. Be in Israel at that time for Passover. Because the rest of the people who don't believe in the Bible enough, during the time of this passing of the planet, we will see the sign in the heavens as Revelation talks about. I don't know what that 12th star is going to be. I see nothing in astronomy now past this March 26th. Unless it's a satellite moon, which could be a small object orbiting around this planet, that could be our 12th star, because the word in Hebrew would have been illuminated object, or stars and whatever. It's quite easy to say that because they wouldn't know what it is circling a planet. They didn't have that level of astronomy. Something we're visually going to see from the viewpoint of Jerusalem after a 12-hour delay in Earth's rotation, and that night will be 24 hours. The Messiah will come mid of that night after the first 12 hours. The rest of the population will be underground, asking the rocks to cover them. Only his people that believe in him will stand above ground waiting for him. And he will take that group to a place of safety while the meteor shower is happening on the opposite side of Earth, on the daylight side. You have simultaneous events happening on different sides of the Earth, you see?
Wow.
It matches the science perfectly whenever you develop the model. And you can't make a story up and predict science that accurate without having prior knowledge of the science. And they didn't have it.
Yeah.
And they can't get the math right because you have to know orbital mechanics. Can't happen. Just like I said, if we tried to figure out these stories of the Bible 15 years ago using a gravity model, we would have failed. It's only a plasma universe that works. It'll take another 50 years before they change the books. We don't have 50 years. That's why scientists are going to be using the wrong model to warn the public. Mm-hmm. They will not have this 12-hour delay in their rotation of Earth because they think it doesn't happen. Wrong. Yeah. The tail of a comet is plasma, and it will shut down the energy coming into our north and south.
just like a rheostat, dimming a light.
Yeah.
We lose 4.5 to 5.5% of the energy coming into the north and south pole, compounded hourly, or we just come to a gradual slope, and we come to a complete stop with a complete 12-hour delay. And it says at this time, do not live along the coastline. It even names 3 towns on the Jerusalem coastline that's going to be flooded. It says don't live anywhere in the world on coastlines. And I live on the coastline at the moment. So
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
whenever the finances come around, I plan on moving.
All right.
I do take the data quite seriously because its accuracy comes with repetitive data. And we have that. The stories are repeated in models that mathematically and scientifically we can prove out. And they are repeating different causes and different events. Because if it passes to the right of Earth or to the left of Earth, you get different causes. Like for Hezekiah, if you're looking at Earth and the sun at the same time, if it passes to the right of us, that's during the time of Joshua's long day and the time period of Revelation. If it passes to the left of us, that's the time of Hezekiah when the Earth tilted. Earth didn't stop in its rotational spin. It just got, because we didn't go through the tail of the comet, we were ahead of it. And the magnetic field is what caused Earth to tilt while it was spinning. You see? So
Yeah,
it depends on what side of Earth that it passes.
Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't have guessed that.
No,
they couldn't have gotten that right.
That'd be a pretty good guess, wouldn't it?
Consistently.
Yeah.
In 14. That proves out the 3-hour eclipse during Yeshua's sacrifice. The moon is not involved with with that eclipse. A solar eclipse is usually caused by the moon, but that's a new moon. Well, Passover is on a full moon. The moon's on the opposite side of Earth. What caused a 3-hour eclipse when the moon can only give you 7.3 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
And it's on the opposite side, so it's not involved. It takes an object roughly 6.5 to 7.5 times the diameter of Earth to give you a 3-hour eclipse. That's what the model shows. Exactly. And then you can read in the text where it says there was earthquakes. It will cause it. But it didn't pass close enough to cause a tilting. And Earth was ahead of it, so there was no meteor shower. The data is there. The data is there. It's whether or not you use the correct model to prove the data. And the plasma model does this.
And sometimes I wish I had a Gulf Stream just in case I'm on short notice. You know what I mean? It's like, let's get to the airport and get the old Gulf Stream fired up and get to Jerusalem. We'll work out the clearances in the various airspaces later.
Well, I have some friends that will be quite rich in the near future here that just call me when you're ready.
Okay, you got it, man.
All right.
And don't think I'm kidding you either.
I'm not kidding you either.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll tell you what, let's plan to talk next month and just catch up, even if it's just for a little bit. Let's see if anything's changed between now and the approach of Passover. I'm going to write it on the wall right here, and let's just get together and chat a little bit. It's always great. I think you're a great guy, and I think I don't know. I just think you're a heck of a man, Gill, for getting into this to the depth that you have and been so dedicated to it. And I'm not kidding you either. And a lot of people appreciate it. A lot of people know that things are wrong. I believe that more people, I mean, I would like to think, but maybe not. I mean, according to Scripture, it's not the case. I'd like to think that, I'll just put it this way. I think more people believe in Almighty God and believe in these things which are stated, which are written in Scripture, more than we think. You know, sometimes people use this and that as some sort of a fashion statement, but I suspect there are some very, very strong believers, and they are in greater numbers than we think.
I had given you a PDF that shows where people can download the free data on these biblical events. They can read it for themselves. I showed the math and the science models.
Yeah, it's in Guest Media.
Okay, and they can download this data for free. And if people want to show a video to their congregation or to their Bible study or to a relative that they have a hard time talking about this stuff, because it is a difficult subject to talk about, I have a DVD that they can play to the group that kind of shocks them into reality. But they'll have to do their biblical work after that. It doesn't explain everything. It just gives them an introduction and the scientific part. And then they need to turn to the book that I furnish in the Bible or the scriptures, and kind of cram for the exam that's coming. It's an open book test that many people are going to fail. You know?
Yeah, it's an open book test that many people are going to fail. Wow, that's pretty strong. Okay, so the only way that we can do this is to go to your YouTube channel, Planet 7X, or do the Facebook thing, Gill Broussard, Broussard, folks. Is that it? No actual website?
I have a Facebook, Gill Broussard,
okay,
and I have a website for the DVD and the book. It's planet7x.net, and that brings you to the data. And I have a YouTube channel, Planet 7X, and you can see all of the biblical data for free as far as the videos. People need to study. They need to come to their own conclusion. Is it real? Is it not? And it is.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Planet 7X, the destroyer. There it is.
If the people are really interested in the math, they look up New Jerusalem fact or fiction. I show the engineering pertaining to that, how it's so exact. They could not have guessed that because we only had those engineering formulas in the last 100 years. Potential strength and the equations to figure out a vessel, the thickness of a wall, the diameter and everything. They had it correct. How is that possible? We can talk about that on another show if you wish.
Let's do. Thanks for your time, man.
Thank you, John.
I'll tell you what, you always leave me in a state of, a slightly trance-like state, because just to use a time-worn expression, you can't make this stuff up.
That's right.
You can't.
The sooner people are out of their trance-like state and they can deal with reality when what's coming, the better prepared they are, because it does hit you kind of in an awe state, looking at this data, like it did me.
Yeah. All right.
So,
God bless, Gill. Talk to you soon. I'm not kidding you either.
All right. Thank you, John.
Remember what we talked about regarding that Gulf Stream, okay?
All right. That sounds good.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye for now. Gill Broussard, everybody. Planet7x.net. I'm looking at it right here, and it's a very nice looking site except the depictions of the destroyer. That looks like the one who sits on the pale horse for sure. Really good fashion sense and totally frightening for some. Oh well. It's like Frank Marino sang in My Ways. We played it the other day. Just keep going. Don't cry. It won't solve anything. Go to your book. You know which one I mean. And until we meet again, exercise caution in your daily affairs. Eyes up always. Awareness, analysis, action. Let your action be to make ready for what's to come. And we'll catch you on the next one. God bless. Be seeing you.